bless the reading of his word. Shabbat shalom. It's been an interesting week, hasn't it? This is one of those weeks that I would call faith stretchers. And it's not lost on me that was really the message that the Lord impressed upon my heart as I prepared for this morning's service. This week's portion is Parashat Vayera. Vayera is translated "and he appeared," and appeared. And it's from the root that means to see. It appears here in the nifal form, which is a reflexive form. The meaning of the term Vayera then is more accurately understood. God caused himself to be seen. God revealed himself. He appeared. The portion begins with a theophany. Genesis chapter 18 finds Abraham Avinu sitting under a tree, terebinth tree. Now, I don't know what a terebinth tree is. I don't think I've ever seen one. But I see it almost like he's, sitting on the ground back against the tree with a sketchbook or something, watching the clouds, and drawing or something, something to pass the time away. And off in the distance, he sees three guys coming. And the hospitable person that he is, he runs out to meet them, recognizing that this is the Lord himself. He invites them in and says, please don't pass by. Let me feed you. And of course, like any good Jew, they said, sure. That was supposed to be funny. That's okay. I'll just keep trying them until you guys laugh. That's okay. So he feeds them, and while they're eating, Abraham is told that Sarah would have a son by that time the following year. This was a joke to Sarah, because Sarah was well beyond childbearing years, and so she laughed, unlike many of you here. The Lord said to her, "Is anything too difficult for the Lord?" Now, I could theoretically stop right there and do the entire message on that one phrase. Is there anything too difficult for the Lord? The answer, of course, being no. But how do we walk that? How do we live that out? At that point, God reveals to Abraham what he's getting ready to do in Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember that? Abraham bargains with him for the lives of the righteous in the city. The Lord settles on the number 10. If there are 10 righteous people in the city, he wouldn't destroy them. Alas, it was not to be. There weren't a whole lot of righteous people. Thank you, I appreciate that. Ba-dum-bum. Lot and his family were spared and allowed to leave, and the rest of the two cities were destroyed. Sadly, Lot's wife couldn't leave well enough alone, and as they're on their way out of the city, she turns around, looks back, which is what she was told exactly not to do, and gets turned into a pillar of salt. So devastated himself at the loss of himself, of his home, his wife, the life that he was leading, Lot becomes essentially a recluse. He's on his way up to Zohar. He doesn't want to deal with the people in Zohar. He's like, that didn't work out before. So he goes and he hangs out in a cave with him and his daughters. Now, we know from an earlier verse, in verse 8, in fact, that these were probably fairly young ladies because they had never known a man. So they start to get worried that their father has gone just crazy enough to live in this cave. They're never going to meet a guy. They're not going to get to go to prom. They're never going to do this. So what they do, they trick their father into sleeping with them, one at a time. They get him drunk, they sleep with him, and each one gets pregnant by their father. The first one, the oldest one, gives birth to Moab. Moab is the father of the Moabites, who gave the children of Israel no amount of trouble over the course of their journeys. Okay? The second one gives birth to the father of Ammon, who created the Ammonites, also enemies of Israel during their journeys. So nothing good came out of it, right? Right. Trick question. Thank you, Abby. Did nothing good come out of it? First of all, God can make good come out of anything. Anything. Moab, father of the Moabites, created a woman by the name of Ruth, who eventually became the line of David, that eventually became the line of Mashiach. Did nothing good come out of Moab? I say something really good came out of Moab. God can redeem anything. Anything. So after we read about this, we read about Abraham and Abimelech. Abimelech, in the Hebrew, Avimelech, my father is king, was king of the Pelishtim, the Philistines. Abraham tells the king as he's passing through that Sarah is not his wife, but rather his sister, for fear that if he tells the king the true story, he would end up getting killed. The king would take Sarah to be his wife. He didn't want that to happen, so he told a little fib. He wasn't entirely lying, because she was family, just not his sister. This is the same Abimelech that Isaac would tell that Rebekah was his sister. Talking about generational curses. He followed in his father's footsteps pretty well. In both cases, God prevents the king from doing anything with the women and leads Avimelech to return them to their husbands. And in both cases, it ends up leading to a better relationship between Abraham and Avimelech and Isaac and Abimelech than there would have been before. So God, once again, takes something that looks really, really horrendous and turns it into a blessing. Then we read about the birth of Isaac. And we read about the strained relationship between Sarah and Hagar on account of Ishmael. But the Lord assures Abraham that Ishmael will be fine, so go ahead and listen to Sarah. Set them out of the camp. And he tells Abraham that it will be through Isaac that his descendants will be named. Isaac becomes the child of promise. In other words, Isaac was the heir of the promise that had been made to Abraham. And then we come to chapter 22. I would imagine that many people across the globe in synagogues are reading about chapter 22 and talking about chapter 22 today. Chapter 22 is a famous section known as the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac. We read about the offering of Isaac on Mount Moriah. Now, it was on Mount Moriah, as we read in chapter 22, that Abraham takes his son up. He builds an altar and he goes to offer Isaac. It was also on Mount Moriah that David buys a threshing floor from Araunah and builds an altar there to repent for the census that he took. And according to 2 Chronicles, it was the threshing floor of Araunah, Mount Moriah, the place where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, upon which the altar for the temple was built. So this is an incredibly significant portion, but even more than where the temple was built, Genesis chapter 22 is an illustration of the faith of Abraham. Now, who cares about the faith of Abraham, right? No. See, it was Abraham's faith that was credited to him as righteousness in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 6. And this is the faith that the New Testament writers write about significantly. So it behooves us to understand what that faith is, what it looks like. And here in chapter 22, we see it. It's an illustration of Abraham's righteousness. we see in Genesis chapter 22 a complete and total dependence on God to fulfill what he had promised. God promised, remember, God promised that his seed, his descendants, would be called through Isaac. And here he is getting ready to sacrifice the very one through whom his descendants would come. Now, if he actually does this, what happens to that promise? That had to be going through Abraham's mind.